After the divorce, I wanted to do something to make things feel normal again. My daughter Lily was 7, quiet and sensitive. She hadn't been the same since her mother left. I thought getting away for a few days might help. Just the two of us. No phones, no noise. Just peace. We packed the car with a small tent, some food, and her favorite stuffed rabbit. I drove north, past the small towns and gas stations, until the road turned to gravel. We reached the lake around evening. It was colder than I expected, and fog hung low over the water like smoke. There wasn't a single person around. The ranger station looked abandoned. Lily liked it at first. She ran around near the trees, tossing stones into the water. The sound echoed across the lake, long and hollow. I remember thinking how quiet everything else was. Even the birds seemed gone. When night came, we built a fire. I sat beside her, roasting marshmallows while she drew shapes in the dirt with a stick. She didn't talk much, but she seemed calm, which was all I wanted. After dinner, I tucked her into her sleeping bag. She fell asleep almost instantly, holding that old rabbit tight against her chest. I sat outside the tent for a while, staring out at the dark lake. The fog had thickened so much that I couldn't even see the opposite shore. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. It was peaceful but empty in a strange way, like the world had stopped moving. Before going to bed, I checked the tent zippers and the car doors. Everything felt safe, just quiet, completely alone. I remember thinking this was what we needed, a reset. When I finally lay down beside her, I could hear her breathing softly in her sleep. For the first time in months, I felt like things might be okay again. But around midnight, something made me open my eyes. I didn't know why. There was no noise, no movement, but for a moment, I had this strange thought that someone was standing outside the tent, just watching. I waited, holding my breath until the feeling passed. I told myself I was just tired. The woods play tricks on your mind. I fell back asleep. The next morning, Lily was sitting by the water before I even woke up. She had her shoes off, her toes dipped into the lake. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and she looked like a shadow through it. When I called her name, she didn't answer at first. Then she turned and said, "The water's humming." I laughed, half asleep, and asked what she meant. She said there was a sound, low and steady, coming from under the surface. I crouched beside her and listened, but there was nothing. Just the soft lapping of water against the rocks. I told her she probably dreamed it, but she looked at me like she didn't believe me. That day we walked a trail around the lake. The woods were silent, no birds or wind. Even our footsteps sounded muffled. At one point, Lily stopped and asked if people ever lived here. I said maybe long ago. She just nodded and kept walking. That night, the air turned colder. I woke up around 2 in the morning because Lily was whispering in her sleep. Her voice was faint, like she was talking to someone far away. I leaned closer and realized she wasn't speaking words I knew. Just a soft hum, drawn out and low like the vibration of an engine underwater. It sent chills through me. I shook her gently and she stopped. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused. Then she rolled over and went quiet. I sat there in the dark for a while, listening, but the forest was dead silent again. In the morning, she didn't remember it. She just asked if she could go down to the lake again. I said no. I told her it was too cold and that we'd head home the next day. She didn't argue, but she looked disappointed. That evening, I stood at the edge of the lake one last time. The water was still black and flat. I thought I saw something move beneath the surface, a slow ripple that spread outward like a breath. When I bent down to look closer, I swore I heard it too then. A deep hum far below, steady and slow, vibrating through the ground. When I looked back toward the tent, Lily was standing there, staring at me, her lips moving. She was humming. The last morning was quiet. The fog had thickened again, heavier than before. I called for Lily when I woke up, but she wasn't in her sleeping bag. Her rabbit lay on the ground beside it, damp from the dew. I ran outside and saw her standing by the water's edge. Her small footprints were deep in the cold mud. She didn't turn when I called her name. She just kept staring at the black surface, perfectly still. When I reached her, she finally spoke, her voice flat and calm. "They're waiting for you to go to sleep, Daddy." I froze. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the water. They told me that's the only time they can come out. The surface rippled even though there was no wind. I grabbed her arm and pulled her back, but the sound came again. That deep hum rising from the lake, shaking through the ground, steady and alive. And then it stopped. The water went still. Lily smiled, just a little. "I told you they were real," she whispered. For the past 10 years, my escape has been the wilderness. I work a desk job in the city. Spreadsheets, emails, the constant hum of office lights, and the only thing that resets my brain is getting completely off the grid. Solo camping ain't just a hobby for me. It's a necessity. I love the feeling of being miles from anyone, relying only on what I can carry on my back. And there's a profound sense of peace in that kind of isolation. So when I got a new ultralight tent and a pocket stove for my birthday, I couldn't wait to test them out. I picked a spot in the Greenwater National Forest, a section that's technically open for dispersed camping but sees almost no foot traffic because the trail leading to it is unmaintained and not well marked on most maps. That's exactly what I look for. The hike-in was tough, about 5 miles of steep, overgrown terrain. By the time I reached the clearing, I'd pinpointed on my satellite map. My legs were burning and I was drenched in sweat. But it was perfect. The spot was a small flat patch of earth on a ridge overlooking a massive, densely forested valley. You could see for miles. I spent the first afternoon just setting up my little world. I pitched the new tent, organized my sleeping bag and pad, and laid out my cooking gear. Then I took my water filter down to a small stream I could hear trickling nearby. The water was icy cold and tasted clean. As the sun started to dip below the opposite ridge, painting the sky orange and purple, I just sat on a log sipping hot tea. This was it. This was the reason I did it. No phone signal, no engine noise, just the sound of the wind whispering through the pines. I cooked a simple dehydrated meal, watched the stars come out one by one, and felt the familiar calm settle over me. I crawled into my tent feeling more content than I had in weeks, zipping it up against the cool night air and falling asleep almost instantly. I woke up with the sun the next morning, feeling stiff but refreshed. The air was crisp and clean. I made some instant coffee on my new stove and sat on that same log from the night before, just watching the morning mist burn off the valley below. It was beautiful. After breakfast, I pulled out my small pair of binoculars to get a better look at the landscape. I scanned the dense green canopy, the rocky outcrops, just taking it all in. That's when I first saw it. On the ridge directly opposite mine, miles away but perfectly visible, was a small dark-colored tent. It hadn't been there yesterday. My first thought was just, someone else had the same idea. It was a little surprising, given how remote this area was, but it wasn't a big deal. The forest is for everyone. I gave a little wave, even though there was no way they could see me, and went about my day. A couple of hours later, I went back down to the stream to refill my water bottles. The trip took maybe 15 minutes. When I got back to my campsite, I glanced across the valley again out of habit. The person from the other camp was just walking back to their tent from the direction of their own water source. It was a strange little coincidence, but I brushed it off. By the afternoon, the air had gotten heavy, and the sky looked like it might rain, so I decided to adjust the guy lines on my tent to make sure the rainfly was taut. As I was kneeling down, cinching the last cord, a weird feeling made me stop and look up. Across the valley, the dark, distant figure of the other camper was doing the exact same thing. They were crouched down, tending to their tent. My heart started beating a little faster. It was probably nothing, but it felt wrong to test it. I did something I wouldn't normally do. I stood up, walked to the very edge of my clearing, and just stood there, perfectly still, facing them. A few seconds later, the figure across the valley stood up and faced me. A cold dread started to seep into my bones. This wasn't a coincidence. They were mimicking me. The rest of the afternoon was torture. Every move I made, they copied. He'd sit on the log, they'd sit on a log. I'd walk the perimeter of my camp. They'd walk theirs. The miles of empty space between us no longer felt like a buffer. It felt like an audience. As dusk fell, I knew I had to get into my tent, but I was terrified. Turning on my headlamp, I saw a tiny pinprick of light flick on across the valley. They were watching me, waiting. Sleep wasn't an option. I lay there in my sleeping bag for hours, my eyes wide open in the suffocating darkness, listening. Every gust of wind, every snap of a distant twig made my muscles seize up. I was too scared to even turn on my headlamp, convinced that the moment I did, the light across the valley would turn on too. At the first hint of gray dawn, I peered out of my tent. The other campsite was gone. The tent, the figure, all of it vanished. It was just an empty ridge, as if it had never been there. For a second, I wondered if he had imagined it all, but the fear was too real. I didn't bother with breakfast. I threw my gear into my pack as fast as I could, my hands shaking, and started the long hike back to my car, feeling watched with every single step. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and filed a report. I'm sure I sounded paranoid, but the ranger took my statement seriously and promised to send a team to check the area. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. Then on Tuesday morning I got a call from an unknown number. It was the park ranger. He told me they'd found the other campsite exactly where I said it would be. It was abandoned, but the person had left something behind. They left a trail camera, the ranger said, his voice flat. We checked the SD card, Mr. Evans. It was full of photos of you. They were all taken at night, while you were asleep. There was a long pause before he delivered the final sentence. The photos were all time-stamped, and they were all taken from inside your tent. It started as a normal weekend plan. There were 4 of us, all friends since college, me, Liam, Jess, and Mark. We wanted to get out of the city for a few days, somewhere quiet. Jess found a new hiking trail online, deep in the Pacific Northwest near a small logging town. It had just opened that summer. None of us had been out there before. But the photos looked peaceful, tall pines, foggy hills, a river running through. It seemed perfect. We drove up Friday morning. The weather was cold, wet air sticking to our clothes. The trailhead was empty when we got there. Just a faded wooden sign and a dirt parking lot. We laughed about how isolated it was, but that was kind of the point. We wanted to unplug. No phones, no traffic, just quiet. The forest looked beautiful, but strange too. The trees were huge, their trunks covered in moss. Everything smelled damp. Even our footsteps sounded muffled, like the ground itself was soft. By sunset, we set up camp beside a stream, built a fire, and cooked. The sound of water and wind through the branches was all we could hear. It felt peaceful, though part of me noticed how quickly it got dark there. That night, we sat around the fire, talking about dumb stuff from college. Jess said she thought she saw lights moving in the woods earlier, like a flashlight beam, but we brushed it off. No one else saw it. When I went to sleep in my tent, I could hear the trees creaking and dripping water. Once or twice I thought I heard faint snapping sounds, like someone stepping on branches far away. But it was windy, and I didn't think much of it. The next morning, Liam was already up making coffee. The air was heavy with fog, so thick you could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The woods were quiet, almost too quiet. We joked about it, packed some snacks, and decided to hike deeper into the trail. It was supposed to loop around and come back near our camp. We figured it would be a good half-day trip. We didn't know then that we wouldn't make it back the same way. About 2 hours into the hike, the trail started to narrow. The trees were closer together, and the fog hadn't lifted at all. Everything looked the same no matter which direction we turned. We started to notice these little things hanging from the branches, small bundles of sticks and twine. At first we thought they were just trail markers, maybe part of some local project. But when Jess pointed out one with tiny bones tied into it, everyone went quiet. They didn't look official. Some were hanging low, right at eye level. Others were way up in the trees, turning slowly with the wind. Liam joked it was forest art, but none of us laughed. The deeper we went, the more of them we saw. Every few feet, another one, each slightly different. Some had feathers, some had bits of red string. At one point, we stopped to take a break, and that's when I noticed the sound. It was faint, like someone moving through the brush behind us. Slow, careful. When I called out, there was no answer. The woods went completely still. Even the birds were quiet. We decided to keep walking, thinking maybe it was just an animal. But after a while, the markers started to change direction. They weren't following the main trail anymore. They led off into the trees toward darker ground. The fog made it impossible to see far ahead, and the forest felt tighter somehow. Jess said we should turn back, but Liam wanted to see where the markers ended. It's probably just a shortcut, he said. Against our better judgment, we followed. The dirt felt softer, almost muddy. The air smelled like wet wood and decay. I remember thinking the forest looked older here, untouched. The light barely reached through the canopy. Then suddenly we realized we hadn't seen the main trail for a while. That's when we lost Liam. 1 second he was a few steps ahead of us, and the next he was gone. We called his name over and over. No answer, just fog and silence. We searched for nearly an hour, yelling until our throats hurt. When it started getting dark, we gave up and ran back toward camp to get help. When we reached our campsite, it didn't look like our campsite anymore. The fire pit was gone. Our tents were gone. Even the logs we sat on were gone. The ground looked freshly disturbed, like someone had cleared everything away. All that was left in the empty clearing was one of those bone markers, hanging from a stick in the center. It was new. The twine still looked damp. None of us said a word. We just stood there listening. The forest felt heavier than before, like it was waiting. Then from somewhere deep in the trees we heard a sound. It wasn't an animal. It was a low whistle, faint but steady, like someone calling a tune. Jess grabbed my arm and whispered Liam's name. I wanted to call out, but my voice didn't work. The whistling stopped. The woods went quiet again. Then a new marker swung from a nearby branch, creaking softly, pointing right back into the fog where Liam had disappeared.